Israel indefinitely delays Palestinian prisoner release as hostages freed. Israel says it is indefinitely delaying the release of more than 600 Palestinian prisoners, in another potentially major setback in the ceasefire process. It came after 6 Israeli hostages, including 4 kidnapped during the 7th of October 2023 deadly Hamas attack on Israel, were released on Saturday. According to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the release of the Palestinian prisoners will now be delayed until Hamas guarantees the next handover of hostages. Without the degrading ceremonies Hamas has been holding each week, there's only one more handover of hostages due in the first phase of the ceasefire, involving 4 of the hostages who died in captivity. No arrangements for the release of other living hostages, due to take place in phase 2 of the ceasefire, have yet been made. Mediators will put in extra hours to try to get the deal back on track and stop the ceasefire from breaking down. Netanyahu accused Hamas of repeated violations, including the cynical use of the hostages for propaganda purposes. His statement came after the release on Saturday of Kal Shoham, Omer Shem Tov, Aliyah Cohen, and Omer Wenkert, 4 hostages who were taken hostage during the Nova Music Festival. The 2 other released hostages, Avera Mengistu and Hisham al-Sayed, were held in Gaza for years, Mr. Mengistu since 2014 and Mr. al-Sayed since 2015. The 6 Israeli hostages are the final living hostages to be returned as part of the first phase of a ceasefire deal, which is set to end next Saturday. Meanwhile, outside the Ofer prison in the occupied West Bank, family and friends waited for the release of Palestinian prisoners. According to the AFP news agency, an 80-year-old mother in Khan Yunis, Gaza, can't believe her son would be released after 33 years in prison. By the evening, Hamas accused Israel of violating the agreement by delaying the release. There was no immediate response from Hamas to Netanyahu's statement. According to Palestinian authorities, 50 of the prisoners who were going to be released were serving life sentences. 60 had long sentences, and 445 were detained by Israel since the 7th of October. There are 62 hostages taken on the 7th of October 2023, who are still being held by Hamas, around half of whom are believed to be alive. In the next phase of the 3-stage ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, which is set to begin on March 1st, more prisoners are expected to be released. Hamas began releasing hostages, facilitated by the Red Cross, in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. After the ceasefire agreement took effect on the 19th of January, initial chaotic scenes have become more choreographed, with hostages flanked by fighters on stages before the handovers. On Saturday, Mr. Shoham, 40, and Mr. Mengistu, 39, were passed to the Red Cross in Rafah, South Gaza before being transferred to the Israel Defense Forces IDF. In October 2023, Mr. Shoham and others, including his wife and 2 children, were kidnapped by Hamas while he was visiting family on Kibbutz Be'eri. His captured family members were released after 50 days. In a statement, his family said, "This is an unforgettable moment, where all emotions are rapidly mixing together. Our Tal is with us." Mr. Mengistu, an Ethiopian Israeli, had entered northern Gaza in September 2014 and been held by Hamas ever since. According to their families, he and Mr. al-Sayed, a Bedouin Arab Israeli who entered Gaza in 2015, had both experienced mental health issues in the past. Mr. al-Sayed's release was conducted privately in Gaza City on Saturday. His family released a statement that read, "After nearly a decade of fighting for Hisham's return, the long-awaited moment has arrived. During these days, we need privacy for Hisham and the entire family, so we can begin to care for Hisham and ourselves." Separately, at Nuseirat in central Gaza, Mr. Shem Tov, 22, Mr. Cohen, 27, and Mr. Wenkert, 23, were freed in another public show by Hamas. All 3 were taken captive at the Nova Music Festival. Mr. Shem Tov had initially escaped by car when Hamas fighters descended on the festival, but was captured when he went back to rescue his friends. Mr. Cohen had hid with his girlfriend, Ziv Aboud, in a shelter at the festival, but was discovered and driven away. The shelter was bombed, but Ms. Aboud survived and escaped. When festival goers were being attacked, Mr. Winkert was able to send text messages to his family to let them know he was going to a safe place, but they lost contact with him. On a live feed, the public releases were met with cheers by the crowds. In Tel Aviv's Hostages Square, celebrating the 6 men's return, their families demanded the release of all hostages. Mr. Shoham's family stated, "Our only request is to seize this window of opportunity to secure a deal that will return all hostages home." Remaining hostages include Eden Alexander, a 21-year-old Israeli-American soldier captured on the 7th of October. His mother, Yael Alexander, who was watching Saturday's hostage release, told the BBC it was amazing to see them free. But for her family it is very tough waiting. There are more than dozens of young men alive, like my son, still waiting to be released, she said. This is the main goal, to release the live people now from Gaza. Saturday's joyful scenes contrasted with earlier this week, when the bodies of hostages, Shiri Bibas, her 2 young sons and another captive Oded Lifshitz, were returned to Israel. About 1,200 people, mostly civilians, were killed in the Hamas attacks on the 7th of October 2023, and 251 others taken back to Gaza as hostages. The Hamas-run Health Ministry reports that at least 48,319 Palestinians, primarily civilians, have been killed as a result of Israel's massive military campaign against Hamas.